Welcome to the European Health Forum 2020. My name is Clemens Martinau and I'm the president of this conference. And I wish I could call the conference to order up in the Kursaal here in Gastein, but in our strange times I can only do it virtually. Nevertheless, welcome. It is an exciting experiment for us here in the European Health Forum, but we do have about 900 registered participants in this conference, which is quite good. And I would like to thank everyone who is coming back to our conference, and a very warm welcome to the first-timers also. Dear friends of the European Health Forum, this year's conference topic is Dancing with Elephants, New Partnerships for Health, Democracy and Business. You might ask, why talking about elephants, dancing with elephants, and why is there a need for new partnerships? Or at the end, why do we need a health union in the European Union? Remember, here at the European Health Forum, we did already talk about the need for bold, practical and smart changes when it comes to health. Last year, we talked about healthy disruptions to make more progress and to move forward. And this year, it is about identifying the elephants which are staying in the way when it comes to making progress in the sector of health. And we all know these elephants are linked to political or business interest. When it comes to health within the European Union, one of the major elephants' name is national fragmentation. The lawyer talk about subsidiarity and the acquis. By the way, there is no talk of the European citizens who might have also a human right when it comes to social justice, equitable access to innovation and health care. During this conference, we will talk about these elephants. They are a fact and not fake. Not addressing the elephants would mean weakening our democracies, our liberties, would mean playing in the hand of more social inequalities and a lack of fairness. I would like that the European Health Forum is a dance floor. We have to lead the dance with elephants. We have to overcome the inertia, the political inertia when it comes to the health union and to health in general. It is about the fundamentals in our society and the national and the multilateral state of play. The state of the union when it comes to health is critical, I would say. There is a weakness in the political center which leads to a slow loss of legitimacy and acceptance of democratic order. I'm deeply convinced that politics is more than just marketing to win the next election. Politics is also much more than satisfaction and satisfying certain business interests. Politics in the end is about well-being, peace, social justice, equity and fairness. And health is a prominent, if not the prominent, factor of all well-being societies. I'm looking forward to hear our keynote speaker this noon during the opening session. They will exactly analyze this larger context in our modern times and society. Yes, we want to talk about a health union for the European Union, and this will be the green line through this conference. And Friday afternoon at the closing plenary, we should have a better understanding what this health union should be about. We are very honored that our former Commissioner for Health and Consumer Protection, Vytenis Andriukaitis, is also part of this process because he has a draft version out there of a manifesto for a European health union. And we invite each and everyone to comment this manifesto, this draft manifesto, because it is necessary, that is deeply rooted in an understanding of us, the European citizens. Let me be concrete. During this COVID crisis, we showed two things. On the one hand, there's a best practice example when it comes to a health union, and we might talk about that also during the conference, because all of a sudden when it came to the fair and equal access to COVID vaccines, all of a sudden we were a health union. And we are pulling this together, and we are very successful, and it is a best practice. But the bad example, the not so good example, so to say, where we failed, is when it comes to the travel warnings and the travel restrictions within the European Union, which is not only a pain for us European citizens, but is also endangering our economic progress, etc. So we have it all. We have the best practice and we have the worst examples. Once again, my dear friends and participants of the European Health Forum here in Gastein, we do need more Europe. And I want us here in the European Health Forum to be the dance floor, dancing with the elephants to overcome the inertia when it comes to this health union. In this respect, I wish you a pleasant conference and us success. And I also wish us success that we don't are trapped in the cyberspace sometimes, but I think we will all do good. And I would like to hand over to our Executive Secretary, Dorli.
Okay, thank you so much, Clemens, for your inspiring words, already getting us thinking in the first few minutes of this opening plenary. I would like to express a warm welcome on behalf of the EHFG team. As Clemens was saying, it's a very strange Gastein for us this year. We're in the Gastein studio, but we're here alone, so we miss you very much, and we do hope that we'll see you again next year. Our slogan, Gastein goes digital. It sounds like an obvious choice, and I can tell you it is, putting it casually, not a breeze. And the fact that we managed to make this possible is due to the amazing EHFG team. So I would really like to express a warm thank you to the EHFG team because they never give up, no matter what. And I hope you will see the result. We are realistic that there will be some technical hiccups, so please bear with us. We're bringing in hundreds of speakers and partners and players in this conference from all different parts of Europe, from their living rooms, from their home offices, from their offices. So there will be one of the other hiccup, and I'm sure you will be hearing one sentence quite a lot that we all know, and that is, "Can you hear me?" But there are definitely also upsides to going digital that we saw. Clemens already mentioned we have a lot of participants, so thank you so much for joining us. And we could invite participants that we normally cannot invite so much because it's always usually also attached with travel and accommodation expenses. So this is a much more inclusive Gastein than we can usually offer, and we're really excited about that. So welcome to our newcomers. What was important to us was that even if we do go digital, the Gastein-style debates need to continue. Particularly in this special year for all of us. We're fighting the same issues, and exchange is needed much more than ever, possibly. For those of you who don't know the EHFG so well, we pride ourselves in hosting open discussions, in hosting also controversial discussions, and in involving all of the players in health. So this does need you, so we encourage you very much to please get engaged, use all the functions that our conference tool offers. Please go also to the networking site, Umbrella. You can arrange meetings with other participants. It works a bit like a dating app, actually. You express your interests and you will be matched with other participants and can then arrange a meeting with that person or not. And please visit also our booths in the partners section. You will find a lot of interesting material there. And you will also find the EHFG help desk. So we're always there for you if you need anything to support you with. Gastein would not be the same if there wasn't also some fun. We can't dance together this year, at least not in person. So please look out for the digital photo booth, which we normally have in Gastein too. So we have it digitally this year. There will be a quiz night on Thursday night. And we have yoga sessions prepared. They were filmed in the Gastein Valley, and you will see they're beautiful. So we're trying to bring a bit of Gastein to you via that. But most of all, please enjoy the program. I think we've managed to put together a really interesting program together with our partners. And I guess it's just time now to start the Gastein debate. And I'd like to hand over to Tamsin Rose, who's the moderator of our plenary today. Thank you, and over to you, Tamsin.
Thank you very much, Clemens and Dorley, for the warm welcome. And I'm sure the weather is shining as it often is when we're in the Gastein Valley. And I look forward to being there again another time in the future. So today our focus is on recovering from the pandemic, a wake-up call for a well-being society. That's been the focus for a number of years, the importance of shifting to well-being, but somehow we've never managed to make it. So is the pandemic the catalyst, the trigger that we need? So just to give you some framework on how the session will work, we have two short input speakers who will give us different visions on how Europe could lead a recovery. And then we have a panel with some very distinguished people who will be sharing their insights. And you, the audience, will have ways to engage with us in a number of different ways. You'll be able to, of course, tweet using the keyword or the hashtag, which is the hashtag is EHFG 2020. And we're also using the interactive tool Wisembly, which for those of you who are joining using the Brella platform, you'll find it on the right-hand side of the stream of your sidebar. If you're joining from another platform, you will see the link coming up on screen and the keyword that you need to connect, because at various points in this session, I will be inviting you to share your viewpoints with questions and with polls. So I'm broadcasting to you from Brussels, and I'm not alone in this room. I have a colleague, Simona Moore, who will be coming out to share some of your inputs. She's going to be monitoring the Twitter feed and also the chat functions. And at times I'll ask her to come and share what she's seeing from your messages. So in that way, we will bring your voice into here, the conversation. So if the theme today is dancing with elephants, ladies and gentlemen, shall we dance?
The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare a number of societal fissures, not least the inequalities produced by our economic systems. We stand at a crossroads in history with a unique opportunity to reimagine our societies and think about the kind of world we want to leave future generations. We can choose to overhaul systems that serve only the few and instead build political power to advocate for new and fairer economic models that centre sustainability, equity and well-being for all. In adapting to the current situation, some of us have discovered alternative ways of living, working and travelling. This provided a glimpse of the regeneration possible when nature has space to breathe, the power of the human connection and the possibilities of technology. It highlighted the importance of resilience. We were reminded of the vital role played by those providing essential but often undervalued services. How can we harness momentum and innovation to effect the systemic change needed to ensure that a new mode of living becomes available to all? This crisis cannot be understood nor tackled in isolation from the ongoing climate and ecological emergency. A green recovery will be vital in moving forward. Will we pick up where we left off and return to business as usual? Or dare we make the choice to build back better?
Thank you. And I'm now going to be introducing our two Kickstarter conversationists. That's Colin Crouch, an external scientific member for the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Societies, and Catherine Trebeck, the advocacy and influencing lead for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And I'm going to start with you, Colin. If in 1st of January 2020, you'd asked me what would be the big problems we'd all be talking about this year, I already would have many things to discuss. The enormous wildfires that destroyed parts of the Amazon and Australia, the failure of harvests and food shortages around the world, the record numbers of people displaced around the world, the to-do list, for our global society was already long and already urgent. And then COVID arrived. And 90% of the world's workforce and 90% of the world's students found their lives disrupted, many of them will never go back to the same situations they had before. The World Bank tells us that we are facing a global recession, the likes of which we've not seen for 70 years. There's some urgency to build back or build back better or a return to normal. But should we really be going there? Was the previous normal so great? Colin, set us out a different vision and how COVID is a lens through which we should look at the broader way our societies operate.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to speak here. I mean, it's very gratifying at the present time for a British person to have a chance to feel a member of the European family still. But this pandemic has deeply paradoxical implications for how we build society, sort of opposing possibilities. On the one hand, the pandemic has made us aware of our dependence on a lot of people who normally we disregard and give very low wages to. The care workers, the nurses, the refuse collectors, that whole range of occupations that became seen as key workers, and we've all become very grateful to them. They've also, many of them, been risking their lives. Some of them have lost their lives looking after us all. So one might say one thing that comes out of this is an awareness that the inequalities that our economic system throws up is deeply, not only unfair, but deeply cruel, in that the people it punishes are often the people we depend on most. Secondly, and similarly in a way, we've become increasingly aware of our mutual dependence because public health issues make you aware that you are not alone. And unless you're extremely wealthy, you can't protect yourself using your own means. Now, health services really got going in the late 19th century as public health services concerned with the great diseases and public health nightmares of that period in the early 20th century. So health was primarily a collective public provision where we all realized our interdependence. During the later part of the 20th century, we increasingly came to see health as about curing individual diseases. And therefore, it was almost a personal consumer good. Now, this crisis has made us aware of the collective nature of health and the collective nature of many of the things that we need to operate as a society. Collective in the sense of dependence on large public institutions, but also we've become aware of our dependence on neighbors and local communities to get us through this crisis. So on the one hand, one might say this pandemic gives us a chance to rediscover both the evils of inequality and the need for shared collective action. On the other hand, one can also see opposite things happening. The crisis has hit different kinds of work very differently. People who are able to work at home have often been able to go on with both their income unaffected and also their health not threatened. And these are largely, they're not entirely, people whose work involves intellectual tasks, technical tasks, managerial tasks, the higher paid people. The majority of the people who have not been able to work at home have been the lower paid people. With certain very important exceptions there among medical specialists who, although very highly paid, have also been at the extreme forefront of risk. But people large numbers of people who could not work at home and whose work was closed down either had no work to do and therefore have become very poor, or they've gone to work and have risked their health. So out of this will come an increase actually in inequalities, both economic inequalities and health inequalities. Also, there's another thing which is perhaps outside the medical issues, probably the cruelest consequence of this virus is that it has hit exactly those jobs that have grown in post-industrial globalized economies. Because the processes hitting manufacturing, processes of automation and robotization have destroyed very millions of jobs, moderately and low-paid jobs in manufacturing. Globalization has a more paradoxical effect, but it also has destroyed some jobs. Now, jobs that are not so much affected by automation and not affected by globalization are jobs where there is a person-to-person service, where the person delivering the task has to be personally close to the person receiving it, from school teachers to waitresses in restaurants. Now, they were the jobs that grew because they could not be replaced by automation or globalization. And it's exactly person-to-person jobs, of course, that have been hit and destroyed in millions by this pandemic. Already, these jobs were often extremely insecure economically. They've now been made massively insecure, non-existent in many cases. So this too will increase inequalities. And in general, we are going to be producing a surplus of people with low and moderate skills, but still shortage of people with high skills. So, as I said at the beginning, the implications are very paradoxical. On one hand, I might say we have now the opportunity to think seriously about inequalities of living standards, well-being, think positively about our interdependence and our need to look out for each other and be willing to provide collectively for each other. At the same time, the underlying political reality will be that the wealthy are going to become wealthier. And that means that the political class and decision makers will be, as they have been for the last 30 years, responding overwhelmingly to the demands of the wealthy people. So there is a moment in which it's possible that what we've learned during the crisis might trump that power of wealth. I call it a moment because it will be transitory, it will be temporary. We don't know how long it will last, but it is a moment within individual countries and within Europe to seize the agenda for social purposes again. Last 20 to 30 years, the European Union has gradually lost much of its social commitment, become much more about liberalizing markets, and has lost the social component that it had, particularly under the Delors presidency. So there is an opportunity, if that moment can strike, before the realities of inequality of political power come back, that we can do something better. Although this is a moment that will be transitory, it is reinforced by another crisis that we were already thinking about, and one that will not pass so quickly, and that's the environmental crisis. So already the issues about greening the economy has raised criticisms of the pure market economy, have raised the need for collective action for joint projects. So in a way, COVID, evil though it is, may be assisting the green agenda in giving us a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colin. And you've given us much food for thought. And you've made the point that, you know, COVID-19, it doesn't feel like it at the moment because we're in the middle of it, but it is transitory. We will exit on the other side of this one way or another. Some people have said that COVID-19 is a transformation moment because of the impact it's had, and it's caused us to question it. I think this is a useful opportunity to pass the floor to Catherine. You've got in your job title, you know, lead for well-being. Is this finally the moment where we see the joined up thinking and a recognition from politicians down to the citizen on the street that things have to change radically in order for well-being to actually happen? It's not something that will happen by accident. It requires thinking, strategy, and planning. Catherine.
Thanks, Tasman, and wonderful to be virtually with you all today. Thank you very much for inviting me, and a real honour to share the floor, online at least, with Colin Crouch too. Long been a fan of his work. I want to pick up one of the terms that Colin was using there, this moment, and it also picks up that idea of the crossroads that we're at. It has been observed that revolutionary moments in humankind's history are times for revolutions, not for patching. And that was said by William Beveridge in 1942 in the midst of the Second World War, when he was writing the document that gave birth to the UK's National Health Service and welfare state. And I think those words, that now is the time for revolution, not for patching, is something we need to hold very tight to at the moment, because over the last few decades, social policy debates really have been stuck in the patching stage. Collectively, our societies invest a lot of resources in helping people survive and cope with an economic system that is doing so much damage to them. We've had an economic system prior to COVID-19 crisis that was dependent on economic growth, and yet it has been proved, as already been said, just how unsafe that is in terms of pushing up against planetary boundaries, pushing Mother Nature beyond her capacity. And it was great to hear, Tasman, you refer to the Australian bushfires, because as an Australian, it was heartbreaking to sit here in Scotland over the winter period here, but the Australian summer, and just watch my country burn up. And I have to confess to you, I thought that would be the wake-up call that would mobilize our political leaders. And yet I was so profoundly wrong. And we did see already, return to business as usual. And it was an economic system that not only was unsafe in environmental terms, but as Colin has outlined so profoundly, was an unevenly shared harvest. Collectively, our world is so terrible at sharing the bounty of economic growth. So much of the wealth that was created in the last few decades, even since the last global financial crisis, which should have been the time that we reset our economic system, so much of that wealth has gone to those at the very, very top. And we've seen living standards flatline, if not decline, for so many people across the world. And of course, that's married up, those vertical inequalities is married by horizontal inequalities of race and gender and disability and so on. So it's an economic system that's unsafe, that was unevenly shared, but it's also, as I think the health community will probably be more aware of than any other sector, it's an economic system that is doing so much damage to communities. It hurts us. We've seen that in rising levels of suicide, rising gaps in life expectancy, rising levels of self-harm, of overdosing, of reaching for coping mechanisms, whether it's drugs or alcohol, prescriptions, medicine. And so now that we've in the midst of a pandemic where political leaders are reaching for policy actions that even 6 months ago would have been dismissed as naive or unrealistic or impossible, we do stand at this crossroads, and the pressure to return to business as usual is profound. We cannot underestimate the voices and the power of those interests that did very well out of the previous economic system, really pushing our political leaders to go back to perhaps not even business as usual, but a more fierce, more toxic form where labour rights and environmental regulations, such that they were, will be discarded. The alternative is to build a well-being economy, one that has social justice, a healthy planet at its core. And Tasman, as you've already said, that requires a huge and extraordinary amount of shifts at all levels of our system, how we design our cities, how we design the very purpose and DNA of our business models, how we describe what the purpose of our economic system is. And I think that it's that level, how we say what the purpose of the economy is about, is where we need to start. Because if we get that right, if we move it away from faster GDP growth, where all we care about is the rate of growth rather than its direction or composition, we will just get ourselves into a corner. And so if we can shift to measures of progress that are much better aligned with what people and planet really need, we'll have a much better chance at moving the policy shifts underneath them, whether it's moving our tax systems away from labour towards wealth, towards environmental damage. We'll have a better chance of designing the sort of business models that are not just for extracting profit up to remote shareholders, but are using profit and commercial viability as a vehicle to deliver social and environmental benefits. And we'll be able to design our infrastructure, our decision-making processes so that they are inclusive and so that they are purposed with that goal of human and ecological well-being to the fore. That requires a mindset shift at all levels. We need to open up our imaginations to not just the possibility, but the very desirability of these sorts of changes. What makes me hopeful is that there are good practices that have been emerging from the last few decades, whether it's progressive businesses, whether it's bold, brave policymakers putting these sorts of things to the forefront, whether it's communities and cities getting on, rolling up their sleeves and delivering us. We know what a wellbeing economy looks like because we see it in microcosm across the world. What we need to do is realign the policy regime so that it is supportive rather than destructive of those initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Again, you set out some very important messages for us, this uneven sharing of the results of economic growth. And you've encouraged us to say clarity on what is the purpose of our society? Why are we organising things in such a way? And I'm struck by the fact that increasingly in the environment of businesses, companies are saying now they want to have not just the core values, but a purpose. And so you have big multinational companies saying, we now want to be capital with a purpose. So the message is getting through one way, but let me ask both of you, Colin and Catherine, we've talked about this huge change that's going to be needed, and the change is going to require enormous shifts in people's understanding, expectations of daily life. To what extent do you think is there public support for the kinds of changes that you're proposing? And is the public ready for the kinds of trade-offs and compromises and maybe even costs that would be required to shift this vision? Colin, do you want to answer that one first, and then I'll come to you, Catherine?
Yes, as I've already said, really, that there is a moment of awareness and consciousness, and as Catherine has said, that these moments appear from time to time in human history, and then after they've passed, then the sort of underlying brute reality slowly reasserts itself. So I think we have a moment of awareness of inequality, awareness of collective interests, and reinforced by what was already making great progress with the public, which is awareness of climate crisis. So I think if political leaders have the guts and the vision, they would find a public that will respond, but this won't last forever, right? We're speaking small numbers of years before this will all be forgotten.
Catherine.
What I'd add to that is I think we're seeing so many people across the world model the sort of shift we see. What is it that's kept communities and families going during the lockdown? It's the kindness of people perhaps they didn't even know before, their neighbours, supporting each other, people delivering food packages and so on when their neighbours couldn't go to the shops. It's people already undertaking the sort of different shifts, embracing being able to cycle around their cities or really valuing their local parks more than perhaps they ever had before. So we're seeing people model that already. We're also seeing that backed up with a range of opinion polls, and there was just one out last week from Eurostat, but we're seeing poll after poll after poll just reinforcing this message that what the public, Europe and the UK want to see post-pandemic is an economic system that prioritises health and well-being rather than GDP growth, and that then is mirrored with deliberative conversations, whether it's citizens' assemblies or participatory budgeting or other modes of deliberation, where our communities are given a chance to talk and discuss in dialogue with each other. Again, we hear those same messages about what really matters to people. And in a way, we shouldn't be surprised because this is what makes us innately human. These goals of what really matters to people are their relationships, security, having shelter over their head, having the mental and physical health, having a sense of purpose and dignity. When you sit down and have a conversation with people, no one really says what they really is a footballer's salary or a faster car or 10 cars in their driveway. What they say is they want a sense of belonging and participation. We've had an economic system that has pushed people's goals away from that, reinforced, of course, by advertising and a lot of education. What we need to do is bring those values that I think communities have always had, bring them back to the fore, and that does require huge reconstruction of our economic system at all levels of which it operates. But I do think the public support is there if we take the time to truly listen to it.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I would agree that I've seen those opinion polls that nobody wants to go back to how things were before, and people are now valuing the connection they have. But we're also seeing quite a strong pushback rejection of some of the COVID measures. You've got demonstrations against wearing masks. You've got demonstrations against some of the restrictions that were brought in. So politicians are under tremendous national pressure. And we'll hear from them in a little bit when we've got a panel. But do you think that they can continue to prioritise public health? You know, has the impact of shutting down the economy to contain the virus been worth it in your eyes? It's given us a moment to think, yes, but it's actually created some mistrust in science. People have said, well, it wasn't worth it to save a few old people to shut down the economy and destroy everyone's workers. So in a way, yes, the public wants something different, but politicians are under real pressure now. Do they have the room for manoeuvre? Catherine, do you want to pick up on that?
I think it's an extraordinarily difficult question, and I think probably people listening on this conference will be much better placed to evaluate that than I will. I suspect it is probably too early. I think given second wave and third waves, and also not being yet able to see the other layers of health impact due to mental health, for example, or domestic violence, not yet able to really tally up the long-term impact of the lockdown. I think it's too hard to undertake those assessments. And how do we even do that? I mean, do we just go down the route of using quality adjusted life years and trade them off against business failures? I think it's almost an impossible question. And I do feel for political leaders who are having to make the most excruciating decisions with science that is emerging, with different opinions on it, and where no decision has an obvious answer either way. There is no right decision. Every single decision a politician takes is fraught with problems, with fraught of trade-off. And I think it's a time, I think, to have much more sympathy with our political leaders than perhaps we've ever had before. That doesn't mean not hold them to account. We absolutely, whether it's the media or the public, need to keep nipping at their heels and ensuring they're making the right decisions. But I think it's a profoundly difficult time for policymakers. And what collectively those of us who are working towards this vision of a different economic system need to do is ensure that they have a sense that moving in that direction is the right way to go, to ensure that they have a sense that the public is behind them, that they have a sense of what this looks like, that they understand the sort of changes that are necessary, see that they are being enacted around the world, that they can model other governments and bring it in their own context. But I do think it's just must be a horrific time for policymakers, and my sympathies with them and my admiration, no matter where on the political spectrum they are. I think it's a pretty horrific time to be taking political decisions given where we are.
Thank you. Colin?
I'm more impressed by the willingness of most people to go along with the restrictions on our lives. They've been fairly wretched, the restrictions, but the number of people demonstrating and complaining and disobeying is actually quite small. And the movements against, say, mask wearing have got themselves mixed up with anti-vaxxers and weird conspiracy theorists. It's not really the great bulk of ordinary people that's involved. In Britain, repeatedly, opinion polls show that people think the government isn't going far enough in imposing restrictions on us. So I don't think politicians should be worried by the strength of demonstrations against the measures that there have been so far. Not at all.
Thank you, Colin. So I'm now going to turn to my colleague Simona, who's been monitoring what you're saying on Twitter and on the Y-Assembly chat. Simona, come and tell us what people are picking up from this conversation, these visions that have been put forward.
Hello, everybody. It's a very interesting conversation that's happening on Y-Assembly and on Twitter. So I'm trying to summarize a few words and key concepts that come up and have a lot of traction. The first one was actually following a statement from Colin on the greener world. So people were looking into finding more information on the greener world, what we mean by that, and also on the good practices of well-being for economies. We're looking for seeing examples from this. So that's the current discussion. So thank you so much. I'll be back later.
Thank you, Simona. So maybe on my last question to you both, and I'll start with Catherine, is we asked, is there anyone getting this right? We know that New Zealand famously has said it wants to have a well-being economy, and it even got some cities that are approaching it through the donut economy in Amsterdam and others. So where should we be looking for examples of people who tried to make this work? Catherine.
Sure, and there are lots of examples, and I tell people to visit our website where we've got more examples across our amazing membership. But where I find inspiration from is places like New Zealand that hasn't got it right in total yet, but they are looking at how they can use the budget mechanism to bring about the sort of shifts in spending and cross-departmental working that's necessary to shift the movement towards a wellbeing economy, to shift the long-term time horizons of policy making. Here in Scotland, the Scottish Government has something called the National Performance Framework, and many other governments have the wellbeing framework that are really setting out this high-level vision of how can we bring collective wellbeing into policy making, how are we going to measure it. The next question is how to really align policies across the board with that and understand the trade-offs and ensure coherence. It's challenging, but Scotland has taken the lead in working with others to go down that journey, and they've created something called the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership that comprises Scotland, New Zealand, Iceland and Wales, and that is all about governments sharing and learning from each other about how to put collective wellbeing at the heart of policy making. And I mentioned Wales. They've for a while had something called the Future Generations Commissioner, whose job it is to scrutinise all policy and budgets according to the needs of current and future generations commission and really hold politicians to account for that goal. And I think that's a fantastic example other places can learn from. I think it's not just about government. And as you've already mentioned, businesses are really talking about what is their purpose? How can profitability and commercial viability be a vehicle, a means to deliver a wide suite of social and environmental goals? And there is a flourishing world of different business models, whether it's worker cooperatives or B Corps or economy for the common good businesses or social enterprises or community interest companies. There's a plethora of models that are saying, yes, we want to trade. Yes, we want to be businesses in the commercial sense, but we want to do so out of different objectives. And I think we need to really put our shoulders behind those sorts of businesses and support them flourish. And of course, there's different mechanisms that citizens are using around the world, whether it's to really build collective solutions through things as simple as community gardens, which on one level are sweet, nice things people do on a Saturday afternoon. On another level are profoundly significant because they're about collective provisioning, taking care of the commons, moving away from consumption and spending time in nature. We know how important that is to health. Things like participatory budgeting, citizens' assemblies. There are so many examples. And countries across the world, even if they don't use the word well-being, are starting in patches, perhaps not with the vigor or boldness that I think is needed, but are starting to, perhaps in separate, isolated instances, move in the direction of creating the sort of policy regimes that are required. And one example I'd give just to finish on is in Scotland, there's been a long-term project of support for worker-owned cooperatives. Now, I think in a wellbeing economy, the economic ecosystem would be populated much more by worker-owned cooperatives, social enterprises, B Corps, those sorts of things, rather than narrow for-profit businesses that are about extraction rather than circulation of benefit. And added to that, there's been a really great support around this idea of community wealth building, where we generate economic activity from community up rather than passively keeping our fingers crossed, hoping for some mythical trickle down that's never going to come. So there are lots of examples that we can take heart from and take lesson from and be inspired by.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. So lots of potential things to be inspired by. And what we'll try and do is we will try and get some of the links from you for these opportunities, and we'll make them available on the Cashline website afterwards, so people who are interested in seeing how this is working elsewhere can gain some of the inspiration from this. I'm now going to invite you, the audience, to play a role because I'd like to ask a question. We've had two very passionate and compelling visions proposed to us by Catherine and Colin. So if you could go to Wisembly, if you participate in questions, you should find it on your right of your screen if you're watching us in Brella. If you're watching us elsewhere, you need to go to the wisembly.com website and you need to enter the EHFG 2020 P1. And the question we're asking you is, what do you think of the visions you've just heard from our input speakers? Are they idealistic but unachievable, necessary and achievable, or there's nothing wrong with business as usual, let's keep going with that? So you're invited now to put in your responses to that. And while we're gathering the responses from the audience, and if we've got people from all around the world, it's going to take us a little bit of time to do that. In the meantime, let's see if we have some cartoons from our cartoonist who's been listening to speeches and delivering us some images to see what he's got to share with us about what he thought of the first speeches. Do we have cartoons that we can share? Dancing with elephants, there we have it. Or there we have an elephant looking for a dance partner. The elephant could squash. Maybe this is a comment on our society. So as a reminder, you're being asked what you think of the visions. Are they achievable? Are they necessary and achievable, or could we just keep going on with how things are going? We're collecting your views, and I'll leave the poll open for another 30 seconds or so while we allow people from around the world to share your views. We're now closing the votes, and let's see what the response is from the audience. What's the result of our polls? What do people feel of the visions that were set out? Do you think they're necessary and achievable? Yes, overwhelmingly, 85% of you who voted said it was necessary and achievable. A small percentage, 14%, thought it was idealistic, in an ideal world, on another planet, in a utopian separate timeline, but it's unachievable. And just 1% of people felt that the world was doing just fine as it is, and we don't need to make a change. So thank you for your votes and your inputs. I'm now going to introduce our next panel, and it includes some of the people who will be responsible for making some of the political decisions that Catherine said she had a lot of sympathy if you're a policymaker who happens to be sitting in the chair when the COVID outbreak has happened. So thank you very much, Catherine and Colin, for sharing your visions with us, and the audience has 85% behind you and backs those visions and says they're absolutely necessary. So thank you, and we will share any of the material you wanted to share with the audience. We'll make it available afterwards. Thank you. And I'm going to now introduce our next panel who will be joining us. We have Maggie de Block, the Minister for Social Affairs, Public Health and Asylum and Migration of Belgium. We have Maya Fjestedt, the State Secretary for the Ministry of Health and Social Affairs in Sweden, and they're both joining us. Thank you very much. We have Sandra Galina, who's the Deputy Director General from the European Commission, DG Santé, and we have Hans Kluge, who is the Regional Director for Europe, the European region for the World Health Organization. Thank you, everyone, and good morning. So what a challenge. Our first speaker set out everything that was wrong with the way we were going, some potential visions, but none of them envied you in the seats you're in. In fact, there was even a call for sympathy for policymakers who in this time have to make these difficult trade-offs. We heard from our first speakers that there's enormous public support for a change. People are revaluing green spaces, social connectivity, but also that our society is so imbalanced that the people who are most at risk were often the people who had least power to survive the pandemic, the most exposed, had least skills and capacity to change. So things were in a very difficult situation. And let me start with our two people with political responsibility. So that would be Maggie de Block and Maya from Sweden, two countries that took very different approaches. Let me ask you the first question. You were elected way before COVID arrived. You had to make decisions based on an emerging science and challenging political decisions. we've heard that the public's views have changed. They want something different. But to what extent do you feel like you've got a mandate to do things radically different? If I could start here in Belgium, Maggie. The public are thirsty for change. They're hungry for something different. But what is it different? And you were elected on a platform maybe 2-3 years ago, and now what we need to do is completely radically different. How much room for maneuver have you got?
Okay, certainly I was on this post from 2014. We had Ebola first, and we had the attacks by terrorists, and now we have this pandemic, which is the most biggest stress test that I have been having in my departments. And yes, this is an opportunity to change things. The way we contact each other, also the way we take care of our more vulnerable people. So I think, of course, we should take this opportunity to make change. And so we have now the way to do it. But of course, it is you have to have enough support for that from also the citizens here who have been also been suffering from lots of measures. So I think it's important now that we give a perspective to the not only to the citizens but also to our economic revival that we have to have, because of course it has been also an economic crisis in lots of countries, and nothing is impossible. So we should take this opportunity to have change, but if we change, we have to make it better for the future.
Okay, thank you. Let me turn to north of the continent, to Sweden. Maya, what's the view from up there?
Thank you. I think that's a very interesting question, actually. But I also think that the policymaker asks herself, do I have a mandate? I mean, that's the bad politicians, to be frank, right? You have to create a mandate. You can't stop asking yourself if you have a mandate. And I think that's an important starting point, actually, in the pandemic. And one of the most interesting parts, I think, of the introduction here is, of course, is crisis the same thing as opportunity? And the answer is, I think, never by itself. There's nothing automatic in building back better. We can never count on that an economic crisis creates stronger democracy or equality. I mean, the most common course of events is that an economic crisis creates inequality and instability. So that has to be a strong political will. And I think we have to have a strong pledge to politicians to actually pledge to build back better, because it has to, there would be a need for a strong impetus in this, I think. And as my Belgian colleague just pointed out, the pandemic has definitely pointed at the weak points, the cracks in our societies, our unequal public health, our underfinanced elderly care. But when I'm optimistic, I'm thinking that we share experience. The transnational bodies have not always delivered in this crisis, but we do share the experience of fearing the virus, maybe of losing our loved ones, of restrictions in society of different parts. And I think that shared experience actually can be a start of building back better.
Thank you. Let me turn now to Hans at the WHO, because the WHO, of course, has been at the cutting edge of the battle against COVID. And as Maggie mentioned, there was Ebola and other crises. But you've taken quite a unique approach. You've created a new commission that's going to look beyond health and look at the broader political and economic impacts. Tell us a little bit about this commission that you've set up. And of course, international commissions are not particularly new. Going back to the Brundtland Commission, we've had big international bodies thinking about things. So how do you hope this new commission will achieve something different? Hans.
Thank you, Tasmin, and hello to everyone, and congratulations to Dr. Clemens Orer, Dorley, all of you for pulling off the Gastein in a new form. I mean, it is really very, very well done. So I would agree with that nothing is impossible. We have seen in Europe very large transformations in society at different points in time during its history, which were an example for the rest of the world. And they were based on 4 key ingredients. First was necessity. Second, innovation. What we need now is European leadership to have courage and collaboration. And why we established the independent Monti Commission is that one of the big lessons we learned so far is the reciprocal relationship between health and economic development and social cohesion, which is nothing new for you and for me. We spoke about this for many, many years and the Tallinn Charter, but we saw that for many high-level policymakers, it was an eye-opener. So the Monti Commission, chaired by Professor Mario Monti, previous Prime Minister, European Union Commissioner, with 16 high-level commissioners, is thinking through how did society change since the COVID, and what does it mean for investments in health and social care in a very pragmatic way. And one of the innovations is that most of those people have nothing much to do with health, because we saw that all sectors were impacted. The cultural sector was shut down for a couple of months, and we know that culture, art has an impact on well-being. And that leads to the concept of the economy of well-being, where we believe in strongly. So that's, in a nutshell, the rationale to set up the Monti Commission.
Okay, thank you, Hans. Let me now come back to both Maggie and Maya, because we've heard this message from Hans that this is a moment of necessity and it calls for courage and collaboration. So let me ask you, what have you learnt about the question of partnerships and solidarity during this pandemic? Because at the beginning of the pandemic, countries responded very much by their own nationalism, trying to secure supplies for their own population. And then gradually we've seen a more collaborative approach. So what have you learned about the need for collaboration and something that could be useful when we try to take the whole of the European economy and society forward? Maggie, would you like to take this question?
Yes, at the beginning, I was very disappointed about the lack of solidarity in the European Union, as some countries closed their counters and borders. And so, of course, we tried to work together with the neighboring countries, but that was not always simple, although we could have be reinforcing each other. So, the way we began to cooperate more, and the European Union tried also to have more coordination between the member states. And I think we should continue that, because now we see that the virus does not respect the borders. The virus is everywhere. You cannot hide for it. So you have to work together in the struggle against it.
Thank you. Maya, let me turn to you to see the impact of the virus has been uneven, and we already had inequalities across Europe in terms of, access to care, economic opportunity, etc. What do you think we could do at European level to make sure that whatever path we take to economic recovery is inclusive and brings all regions benefits?
I think it's with great grief that we have seen the tears in our society that was the result of COVID-19. And I share the view of Maggie, of course, that this has been a time when we, to start with, did not see the international organizations perform well. I think that there are many strong developments right now that are very promising. We have the long-term budget and recovery plan, of course, of EU. And of course, it's very important to to have this as a part of investing in people and planet, and also to show that for the future that, for example, the EU is reacting to a crisis. I think one part that has been difficult as a policymaker, and I was of course moved by the sympathy expressed here in the beginning from Catherine, but that has been policy making under the large extent of scientific uncertainty. And as a policymaker, you want to turn to science to have an answer. And science has been divided. It's been a completely new virus. We've been struggling with information and our relationship to science and private actors as well. So I think that we need to build better networks between the private actors, academia, and policymakers. And I think that will also be a part of reaching a better equality in this part.
Thank you. Let me turn to Sandra to ask the question, does the EU have the means, financial, political, or others, does it have the means to both protect its citizens from COVID with all of the restrictions that requires, the cooperation, and to recover from an economic crisis which we haven't seen since the entire existence of the EU? So can you do the two things at the same time?
Excellent question. First of all, I would like to thank Clemens Auer, because he has invited me here, and I'm humbled by, the presence of all the other guests, two ministers and the head of the European WHO operations. I'm a much more modest bureaucrat. The means we have, and I may say that I was listening attentively, and just 1 year ago, I don't think that Europe would have been what it is today. Under President von der Leyen, we have pledged 1.8 trillion for recovery and resilience. And I may say that internally we're working to implement this fund. This is not just money that is there. We will have 750 billion, to boost, I would say, the new budget that you can conceive with the next generation EU. This is all about digital, green, and I may say I'm proud to be working also in that, because there is also a health part for resilience. We will have also a reinforced long-term budget, and Minister de Bloch or I would say others know a lot about the fight to arrive for this 21-27 long-term budget with 1.1 I would say trillion. So here we will have two transitions, the digital and the green, but as I say, we will have the means also to go for health, because, let me say to you, the previous two speakers, I must say they were fantastic, because they gave me really the impression that Europe is ahead. Europe is going towards what the societies are clamoring to have. If I were to be very concrete of possible areas of investment, digitalization in health systems. This is important because health data for treatment are important for the ministers that we have here, but also for the patients, because without, I would say, your digital data, your digital passport, it's very difficult to get the good treatment that you need. Long-term care infrastructure, this is very important. So we heard about the buildings from Dr. Crouch, but there are many other things like equipment, renovation for energy efficiency, the green transition also for the healthcare buildings is very important. We need more capacity, I would say, also. And therefore, we cannot go with business as usual, because we will need emergency stocks. We were all too aware of the protective equipment issues we had, the intensive care unit medicines and equipments, testing kits, the lot. Universal health coverage. This is about affordable healthcare. We need to ensure that the population has coverage and that these services are accessible. I think this is a big objective. Europe can do a lot. We have the funds, but the programs will then be national. We have, I would say, we have to have good preparedness for the crisis, which we didn't have this time. We managed. I think praise goes to the various governments that managed, But frankly speaking, we need to have something much more structured, much more systemic. There is quite a lot of requests also in civil society about well-trained health workforce. It's not only numbers, it's also geographical availability where they're needed. It needs to be more balanced, this presence across the regions. It's just too evident to me that I'm in the sector that there is a sort of, I would call it brain drain or capacity drain from poorer areas towards richer areas. Therefore, you know, the geographical distribution of the health workforce is a very important topic. This means also improved working conditions for this workforce. Disease prevention and promotion. I must say that investing in health is very smart. As we heard it from Catherine, investing in health is really something that is a preliminary condition to any, I would say, economic growth. We may be fighting with the recovery fund the economic evils that this crisis has brought about, but for as long as we have not tamed the virus, and here comes, I would say, the excellent initiative that was taken about vaccine. You know, for as long as we have not tamed the virus, we will not be out of the threat of possible lockdowns or waves, second waves, whichever way we want to talk about this. We have growing demands in Europe. We all know that this is a society that is aging. It's a society that needs to take care of chronic diseases. So may I say very blatantly that health remains an underinvested area, We have, I would say, a report from a high-level task force on investing in social infrastructure in Europe. It was published well before the COVID crisis, but I think it's a good read for all of us because it shows that there is an investment gap of 70 billion in social infrastructure for health and long-term care in Europe and in the member states, obviously. So, you know, we have, I would say, also commissioned a market study to try to identify the deficit in healthcare capital stock and assets, and you know, the picture is not particularly good. So I would say we have the means. We now need, I would say, the courage of all politicians, and I think that latest events have shown that Europe is courageous, is embracing this challenge, and it's trying to express its best solidarity. So I'm very grateful for the words of the two ministers who were pointing to the lack of solidarity, because this should not be repeated ever again. And President von der Leyen has stressed that, you know, Europe is a place where solidarity must be the first principle to abide by.
Thank you, Sandra, for those words. Let me remind the audience, you can submit questions or comments during our conversation. You can follow the links that you'll be finding on the screen that will show you how to do it. And on the right-hand side, for those of you who are in the Brella platform, you have the opportunity to use the chat function. For those of you who are watching at home, the Wisembly, you can send in your questions for our panelists. At this moment, let's look at the vision from our cartoonist, see what he's got to share with us of some of the things that he's been hearing and how that's inspired him with his creativity. Let's see some of his ideas of what we've been talking about. And here we've got some corporate capitalism wanting to go back to the usual being stopped by the virus, and the world saying, we need to change. It's the economy of well-being rather than the economy of growth and loot. I should say that the image of the coronavirus is so well known now that even my 7-year-old son, when he sees a picture on a news story, says, "That's the virus." So we all know now what the villain looks like. A small green round virus.
Ingen som har frågat den närstående covid tycker att det där är kul. Ursäkta.
Okay, so let's go back and pick up on a couple of the issues that were just mentioned. And Hans, I'm going to come to you at the WHO, because as a result of the response to COVID, care for a lot of ongoing chronic conditions, which is the heart of what most health systems deal with, more than 80% of care is for chronic conditions. A lot of that was disrupted. So we've now got a big backlog of care. Is this going to be finally the tipping point that would allow a better investment in something the WHO has been calling for years, which is a strengthening of public health and community-delivered care?
Thank you, Tasmin. So it comes back to what Sandra was mentioning very rightly so, the universal health coverage within the Sustainable Development Goals. In fact, at WHO Euro, we don't wait till the pandemic will be finished to do an action review. We did the so-called in-action review. And one of the lessons learned, no surprise, is strong health systems based on strong people-centered primary health care means strong national health security. And definitely, the primary health care plays a crucial role to unload first and foremost the burden from the hospitals. Because when speaking daily to our counterparts in the countries, there is also a concern of too much pressure on the doctors, the nurses in the hospitals, while we now are going into the flu season, reopening of the schools and the academic year, and excess mortality among the elderly. So it comes back really to the basics. The next one is no health without health workforce. I think that should be a fundamental change, as you were telling, Tasmin, on the public health workforce, which for many, many years we had been advocating for more recognition. And I think the whole world has seen their bravery and their merit, and this should open up a new material and future for them in line with their responsibilities, because ultimately we saw no health, no economy, no internal markets. And what we're advocating for is a dual track health system response. While we go forward with the control of the coronavirus, we need to pick up on the other issues as well. For example, we know that in 68% of the larger European region, there was a delay or even an interruption of care for chronic patients, which in some countries will lead to an increase of breast cancer mortality of 10%, colon cancer of 15%, which could be avoided. So definitely, that's a very, very big lesson and point for action.
Thank you, Hans. You've raised a very interesting point. I'd like us to address an elephant in the room that doesn't get picked up a lot, which is the challenge of mental health. There are going to be long scars and trauma from the impact of COVID, whether it's frontline workers pushed to do things that they've never had to do before, to confront levels of death that they've never had to deal with before, whether it's workers who've been unable to work, been stuck at home, kids and family life disrupted, facing uncertainty in their jobs. Mental health was already at the bottom of the pile when it came to political priorities and money. And it's clearly an area where we need to do something. So let me ask any of the panel who wants to pick up on this issue, how do we help the recovery from COVID needs to have some focus on mental health, psychosocial support, and rebuilding communities. Maggie.
Well, I think this is very important that we now know that we have to give more mental health to all people. I mean, even people who didn't needed the care before, because there are many families who have been suffering, losing their family members, friends, and also there has been, because of the lockdown for several weeks, people who were very left alone and isolated and suffered also mentally. So I think, first of all, we should listen to the people, also to the health workers who have been very stressful and also have been working with also the danger for their own lives or the lives for their families. So we have to listen to them. We have to take measures on all levels and learn lessons about what has happened in our society, which was a bit of a big war, but it was a war against a virus and not against bombing.
Thank you. Maya, you wanted to say something on this.
Yeah, thank you. I can just quickly add something to that. I mean, we've been speaking for years about the interconnectedness of all these issues. I mean, that health is a part of sustainable development and equality is a part of sustainable development, and health is also a precondition for equality. And of course, a green environment is also a precondition for health. I mean, we all know these triangles and these interconnections, but it has to be more than knowledge. We have to act on this. And well, to me, mental health is definitely not at the bottom of the pile. And without being too realistic, mental health is definitely also a large cost of society. It's the cost, of course, of sick leave, but it's also a cost of being a non-functioning parent when you suffer from mental health, etc., etc. And considering the considerations of mental health was also part of the Swedish decision not to close schools, of course, respecting every other country's decision here. But economic crisis also tends to lead to mental ill health, of course. People are losing their jobs. Anxiety levels are increasing. Isolation, we have been trying to protecting our elderly for this 6 months by isolating them in some extent. Of course, this has led to an epidemic of mental ill health of the elderly, and we have to have all this consideration at place, and definitely linking them, I think, to the 2030 agenda.
Okay, thank you. Hans.
Yes, very, very important issue, Tasmin, and I agree with respected colleague from Sweden and Minister De Blok. In fact, I would like to make a point here for the mental health of our health and social care workers. Recently, we celebrated World Safety Day, and we dedicated it to the safety and mental health of the health and social workers, but also all frontline workers like teachers, which really helped us to keep society running. 2 weeks ago, the regional committee with the 53 Ministers of Health of Europe approved the European Programme of Work 2020-2025, and one of the 4 flagships is the Mental Health Coalition. And I'm very humbled that the Queen of Belgium, Queen Mathilde, who is an SDG advocate, will champion the Mental Health Coalition across Europe to bring together leaders, champions, the people affected, to decrease stigma and discrimination and further service delivery reforms while increasing the political commitment. And their partnership is very important. I'm very grateful to Commissioner Dr. Stella Kyriakidis. We signed a joint statement during the Regional Committee and agreed to join forces, among others, on the issue of mental health, which also this Friday, with Mental Health Europe and the Director General of the Ministry of Health of Belgium, Mr. Peter Pacon, we will address. So full support.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to invite Simona to come and share with us some insight on what people have been talking about on Twitter and on the chat. Simona, how have people been receiving the messages that we've had so far?
Yes, thank you so much. Indeed, people are receiving a lot of different messages and also have a lot of critical comments, actually. So the one element that has been mentioned a lot is having the right data information to actually track the process for a sustainable and more digital health system. And then for those who are really much in the EU health bubble, it's the EU for Health program and the funding, whether it's enough or not. So with that, I'll give the floor back to Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you. And so now let's follow the link from the audience and focus a little bit more on the EU and what it's going to do next and what its capacities would be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a poll and invite you to, in one word, we're going to ask you, the EU has agreed a considerable corona recovery package, as Sandra mentioned, 1.8 billion. In one word, where is the policy area or topic that you would prioritize to build that better and greener? We heard our first speakers, Catherine and Colin gave us compelling messages about how we need to change. So from you, where should we be focusing? We've got a commitment and we've got a big budget. What should we be looking at? Thank you. We're creating a word cloud with the messages that you're coming forward. Everyone agrees we don't want to go back to business as usual, but where should we be focusing our attention? There are so many challenges that we need to pick up on. We've got education here, healthy lifestyles, preventions, and workforce. Workforce is coming through strongly, and several of our speakers have spoken about that. And particularly Hans just mentioned the fact that the workforce that really took the heaviest burden during the wasn't just health workers, we had social workers, care workers, and people with caring responsibilities in homes, the public service workers who were right at the front line, who had little choice and were required to often expose themselves to great risk. So a strong message there about the workforce. Preparedness coming forward here in your word cloud. Again, this is going to be a big priority for the future, is building resilience in our economies, in our societies, and our health systems for what's coming. We don't know yet what it will be, future pandemics, climate change. We do know that change is coming. So certainly a message there about increasing our preparedness. Education and prevention coming through as well as messages. And I like to see that we've got participation here. If you think back to the messages that both Colin and Catherine gave us, they talked about engaging people, listening to what people value and find useful in their local environments, and making sure those elements get brought into decision making. So participation, digitalization coming forward. Thank you. We'll stop this in a minute and we'll see what the final result will have been from all of these different inputs. Literacy, people, tackling inequalities and unhealthy situations for people. Co-creation coming forward, yes. If this is a package for societies, then people should have a way to help co-create how it should be spent and how the priorities should be allocated. Okay, so I'm going to now close the input on the word cloud. So thank you very much. These are some of the areas that you see you would like us to focus on. And I believe we have another cartoon to show you. So let's see our view from Floris, his creative impression. Remember, we asked, does the EU have the capacity to do something that's seemingly contradictory, which is protect people from health threats and also protect them from the economic impact of closing things down? So there we have a view. Should we be competing? And is there a way forward? And these were the visions that we got from Catherine and Colin, the economy of well-being, but we can put these things together. It doesn't have to be a contradictory fight. So let me now come back to our panel, and we've got the last 10 minutes or so of our panel, and let me ask you to think, where should we be prioritizing moving forward? What actions can we all take that would build in? You saw the messages from the audience: participation, people, co-creation, looking at tackling inequalities, making the link between the economy and people. So this is the message that the audience clearly wants. What would be your closing message? What do you hope we would get out of it as a lesson from COVID and as a reorienting of our way forward? Our first speakers talked about what's the purpose? Why have we got institutions and political frameworks and economies in such a way? It should be about delivering well-being for people. Sometimes it feels like it isn't. So how do we get there? Shall I start with you, Maya? What would be the final message you want to give to our audience?
Thank you. I think that one conclusion is definitely that investing in public health is investing in society. When we look at which groups have been affected the hardest by COVID-19, it's definitely the groups with the lowest public health. And we've known all this time that we have unequal public health, and we need to invest in that now. And that's definitely, investing in public health will be good for economy, it will be good for society, it will be good for sustainable development. The other part I would like to raise is the need for equity in healthcare. We need to have strong welfare systems. We need to have equal access to lifelong learning, and we need to have a sustainable economic growth. And as a Swede, I'm of course a strong believer in solidarity in a tax-financed welfare system. I believe that is one path to an equal healthcare, and definitely also to social insurances and the possibility to have a sick leave, because what's really affecting societies is when people cannot go on sick leave, and that is increasing inequality in our society, and we cannot afford more inequality in societies. Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie, view from Belgium.
Yes. The lesson I take home, and I am home, that is that we have to work together at the same time at all these topics mentioned. It's not this or that, it has to be all of them. And to achieve this, we have to work together with other disciplines, but also with other countries. And we can only say that without also resolving the economic crisis, it's impossible to resolve the health and social needs. So we have a lot of work to do in every country.
Thank you. Hans, let me come to you. What's the final message you'd like to leave with us? The WHO's role and its powers and its capacity have been under the spotlight like never before. So how do you want to lead things forward, and how do you hope things will be different in 12 to 24 months?
I would say good health policy is an equalizer. It decreases the inequalities and it convenes across the WHO European region. Last week, I had discussions with the Prime Minister, Minister of Health and Foreign Affairs in Moscow, end of October. I will go to Turkey, December. I will go to Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia. Health is a very strong diplomatic tool. Health for all, and it really equalizes every one of us, independent of ethnicity, sexual orientation, financial capacities. So good health policy is the cornerstone of a fair and safe society.
Thank you, Hans. Sandra, the EU, we've spoken a little bit about the EU's recovery program, and the EU sometimes is the favorite for people to say it's either working or not working. It's the fault of the EU. But let me ask you, specifically looking at the economic issues. In 2008, we had the economic crisis, and some of the policies that were proposed and led from the EU institutions had a huge impact on health, a very negative impact on health. There were limits on spending. What we're looking at as a result of COVID-19 is perhaps even worse impact on our economy. How do we make sure that at the EU we have learned the lessons, and where the EU has its political and economic instruments, that we are supporting everything we've talked about this morning, investing in people and in a human-centered recovery, and we're not falling back on the old ideas of cutting public spending and viewing health as something that is a cost and not investment. Have those lessons been learned, and will the EU be a friend to investing in public health this time round?
Well, I must say that my task is also easy after the speech on the State of the Union of the President. One of the first ideas is not the first idea, was to create a health union. I don't think that would have been possible only 1 year ago. So we have learned our lessons. There is no opposition between economics and health. Health is a precondition for, I would say, any good economic situation, but also economics are important. I think that the words I have had from the two ministers, but also from Hans now, are really pointing to the fact that we may have single markets, we may have, I would say, capital unions, but without a health union, we are not going very far. Suffice it to show the disparate measures that are being adopted. So, do we have the means, you ask me? Yes, we have the means. We have the money. We are putting the money where it needs to be. Now, the issue is, how will we implement this? Because, at the end of the day, is a matter of creating a project that lives up to the vision, but also implementing it. And here, it's where I say The European level is the best level for the stimulus. We will be given the stimulus. We will be making proposals, and I will not bore you with speech about a big package that we are preparing on health, where there will be a revisitation of cross-border health threats, the revisitation of the mandates of 2 agencies that deal with health. I don't want to bore you with that, but that is certainly a big piece in the puzzle to go towards a health union. I was reading in the statements here, there was somebody who was saying, yes, let's create a health union, but also let's create a health literate union, which is also one of the parts that is in our, I would say, shopping list. The EU for Health was mentioned. Yes, EU for Health, we had expectations to have, I would say, a budget of at least 10 billion. We didn't have that budget. We are extremely, I would say, we regret that immensely as European Commission, but the budget we have today is 4 times the budget that we used to have. So I'm sure we will be able to do something on issues such as Europe Beating Cancer Plan, or I would say other initiatives that concern health. Yes, we have the money, but we have also, more importantly, the political vision of the President and of Commissioner Kyriakides, both fully committed, somehow delivering after this horrible crisis that has been a catalyst for many things that were simply, latent in societies.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandra. So a clear message that this mandate for the Commission feels like it's got its purpose will be to look to how to reorient the economy. And as a reminder, at the beginning of the session, we started with these strong visions from Catherine and Colin, who said that we can reorient our societies away from consumption and towards well-being, towards participation, towards belonging, towards connection. And if you listened to the State of the Union address by the Commission President von der Leyen, I think that message came through very strongly. And she said that Europe has a mission to protect health, both at home and abroad, and a strong commitment to global health as well. So let's hope that this is the start, this is the catalyst moment for the shift that we've been talking about, where the purpose of our societies and our EU infrastructures is towards health and well-being. And that was the question we asked, is the pandemic a way to move to the economy of well-being? So could I say a warm thank you to all our panelists from all across Europe from joining us, and to you, the audience, from tuning in. I hope you found it useful. A reminder that tomorrow's plenary session is looking at the digital influences on health, democracy and business. That will start at 2 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. Thank you for your time. Take time to get up and move around before you join us for afternoon sessions. Thank you to Simona and the colleagues behind the screen that you don't see who did all the technical side. Thank you and goodbye.